Why haven't we started to speak English, even though our spoken English is likely to be the part that needs improvements the most? What is keeping us from making this huge progress towards it? I've gathered a few reasons from my own learning experience and my observation of my students' experience to hopefully provide you with some insight. So if you find yourself fit into one of the categories that I will talk about later on, maybe you'll find some useful information from this video. So the first reason why we haven't started to speak English could be that we always plan to start tomorrow. These people have a good plan, but they rarely execute it. Perhaps try to think of all kinds of excuses to continue postponing it. And it just never gets done. And maybe practicing English speaking has been on your mind for years and you have practically done everything you could except for actually speaking it. And my tip is start today. Let's not give ourselves any more excuses, and you don't even need to have a good plan. Just put one or two things on your to-do list and get started with that. For example, you may want to start talking about your day to yourself and maybe recording yourself, or you want to summarize a movie that you just watched or any kind of English video, or simply make some sentences with the expressions or sentence structures that you just learned. Anything would be better than nothing, and you need to start somewhere. Another reason why we haven't started to speak could be that we are always afraid or concerned about our grammar, our word choices, or simply how our English sounds. And this happens to me all the time as well. It's almost like we have this absurdly high expectation for ourselves all the time before we even open our mouth. And the truth is, as soon as we start to speak, we're already ahead of so many people because most people won't even do that. Of course, my point here is not to ask you to compare yourself to others, as that's not going to lead us anywhere. The point is that we should feel good about ourselves anytime when we decide to speak English. It's definitely a step forward, and we won't know where we need to make improvements until we start speaking the language. Of course, we're not perfect. We make mistakes, a lot of them, and we may even sound quite ridiculous, but we're not going to be there forever. Once we know where we need to work harder, we will make improvements, but never let that stop you from practicing. Or we might find ourselves too self-conscious whenever we want to open our mouth. I fall into this trap all the time. I feel that I'm going to be judged if I make any mistakes. I worry too much about everything all the time when there really is no need. This is when I would remind myself that I'm doing a great job and that when I make mistakes, nobody but myself will really stress about it. This is when I need to get over myself and my ego and just focus on the practice itself. At the end of the day, we're only practicing because we want to get better. Another reason why we haven't started our English speaking practice could be that we feel we don't have anyone to speak with. And that in itself becomes a legitimate excuse for us not practice at all. I've talked a bit about that, about how to practice your spoken English when you don't have someone to practice your English with in another of my videos. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but basically you don't need to have a partner to practice your spoken English with. There are many different ways you can do it by yourself, and probably better. For example, you can start paraphrasing things that you read or hear, or use new expressions to create new sentences, or find some topics to talk about, record yourself when you talk about your day, or even repeat after a native speaker if you like what they're saying. We have to remind ourselves that people have improved their spoken English with a lot less. Right now, we have everything we need at only a click away. Last but not least, we might not want to start practicing because we don't know what to say. And this I find often goes hand in hand with the previous reason I just mentioned. So usually we hear people say, I don't have anyone to practice my English with, and neither do I know what to talk about anyways. Again, you can refer back to some of the suggestions I gave earlier for the previous reason and make full use of those exercises that you can do perfectly by yourself. At the end of the day, we just got to be really honest with ourselves. And regardless of how hard it is, we need to start with something that we're most comfortable with. So if you feel clueless when it comes to English learning, start with something small. For example, like using a couple of expressions to make up sentences that you might say in your daily life, and do that a few times every day, until you become absolutely comfortable and absolutely at ease every time when you need to use those expressions. And once the task becomes easier for you, you can then move on to making up very short conversations, like what you might say when you run into someone that you meet for the first time, or you run into a very good friend. So we would obviously cover different bases in different situations. So start with that. Start with something small and then gradually work your way up. And I think we really need to stop fantasizing about speaking like a native speaker when absolutely no efforts have gone into prepping you for that day. We may lie to other people, but we can't lie to ourselves. Whether or not you have done any practice and what practice you have done, you're the only one who knows the truth.